Welcome to North Point Kids. I'm so glad you decided to watch today's video lesson. And please remember to hit your like button, or better yet, leave me a comment to let me know that you watched this lesson. So today we are talking about God is forgiving. And we are going to learn more about that by looking at the story of when Peter denies Jesus. And that's in Luke chapter 22. And then we're also going to look at John chapter 21. So as I said, today we're talking about the fact that God is forgiving. Jesus died on a cross to take the punishment for our sins. Anything that we ever do that is wrong in God's eyes. And he did that so that God could offer forgiveness to us. So right before Jesus went to the cross, he was arrested and he was put on trial. And when he was being questioned by the high priest, as I said before, one of his disciples, Peter, one of his very closest friends, did something that was really, really hurtful. We're going to say that this cross represents Jesus as I tell the story. And we're going to let this guy represent Peter. But I also want you to think about it representing you as well. So I'm going to read Luke chapter 22, verses 54 through 57. Then the men arrested Jesus and led him away. They took him into the high priest's house. Peter followed from far away. They started a fire in the middle of the courtyard. Then they sat down together. Peter sat down with them. A female servant saw him sitting there in the firelight. She looked closely at him. Then she said, "This man was with Jesus." But Peter said he had not been with him. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. Did you catch that? Peter, who was one of Jesus' closest friends, one of his closest disciples, pretended that he didn't know Jesus. Peter turned his back on Jesus. Can you think of a time that you were maybe embarrassed to be a Christian, or a time that you didn't do the right thing because you were embarrassed? Maybe you didn't pray before eating your lunch at school or at a friend's house because you thought people would laugh at you. So I'm going to turn Peter, or you, around so that your back is to Jesus. And I'm also going to have Peter, or you, take one giant step away from Jesus. Guess what? Peter did it again. Listen as I read Luke 22:58. A little later, someone else saw Peter. "You also are one of them," he said. "No," Peter replied, "I'm not." I want you to think about a time that you knew what Jesus would want you to do, but you didn't do it. So think about that for just a moment. Something that you knew you really should have done, but you didn't do it. So now I'm going to move Peter and you another giant step away from Jesus. Guess what? Peter didn't stop there. Let's see what Luke 22:59 and 60 say. About an hour later, another person spoke up. "This fellow must have been with Jesus," he said. "He's from Galilee." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Has there ever been a time in your life that you said or thought something negative, or said something not nice about Jesus? Or maybe you used Jesus's or God's name in a bad way? Think about that for just a minute. And now I have to move Peter, or you, to take a third step away from Jesus. And I'm also going to write the word sin right here to represent the first time Peter denied Jesus, or the first sin that you could think of when you were thinking about the questions I asked you. I'm going to write sin the second time to represent the second time that Peter denied Jesus, and I'm going to write it again for the third time. So, how would you describe your position or your connection to the cross now, or Peter's? Are you close? Or are you far away? Now you're far from Jesus. You've got your back turned away from him. And look, what is separating you from Jesus? Your sin. Now let me ask you this. Did Jesus ever move? He didn't, did he? The only person that moved was Peter or you. Peter really did love Jesus, and I bet you love Jesus too. In fact, all of Jesus' other disciples ran off as soon as Jesus was arrested in the garden. But Peter, he followed as they took Jesus away. He stuck around. He was determined to be a good and faithful friend. But in the end, Peter let fear take over, and the next thing he knew, he had said 3 different times that he didn't know Jesus. Let me ask you this. You probably know the answer because this is a familiar story, but do you think that Jesus already knew that Peter would do that? If you said yes, then you're right. Listen to what happened next. I'm going to read Luke 22, 61 and 62. The Lord turned and looked right at Peter. Then Peter remembered what the Lord had spoken to him. The rooster will crow today, Jesus had said. Before it does, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Peter went outside. He broke down and sobbed. And sobbed means that he cried. His heart was broken because he realized that he had sinned against Jesus, his very best friend. So think about that for a moment. Think about when Jesus turned and looked at Peter. What do you think that felt like for Jesus? You think that that was hurtful? I do. How do you think Peter felt? Well, it tells us that he went out and he started crying. He felt really bad for doing that. Think about it this way. Imagine saying mean things about your very closest friend, and then you realize your friend overheard everything you said. That's kind of like what happened here to Peter and Jesus. But guess what? There's very good news. The good news is that God is forgiving. So let's talk about that. Jesus died on the cross to forgive our sins and to forgive Peter's sins. And after Jesus rose from the dead, after he came back to life, he did something pretty special with Peter. Let's see what Jesus did. To see that, we're going to look at John chapter 21. First, I'm going to read verse 15. Listen up. When Jesus and the disciples had finished eating, Jesus spoke to Simon Peter. He asked, Simon, son of John, do you really love me more than these others do? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. So now, Peter is going to take a giant step backwards, back toward Jesus. Because he said, I love you, Jesus. We're gonna get rid of that sin. Now let me read John 21, verse 16 to see what happened. Again, Jesus asked, Simon, son of John, do you really love me? He answered, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, Take care of my sheep. So now you or Peter can take another step back towards Jesus. We're going to get rid of that. Now, John 21, verse 17. Let's see what Jesus did next. Jesus spoke to him a third time. He asked, Simon Peter, son of John, do you love me? Peter felt bad because Jesus asked him the third time, Do you love me? He answered, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, Feed my sheep. So now, you or Peter can take a third step back. Let's get rid of that sin that was separating you from Jesus. And now, we're going to turn Peter or you around to face Jesus. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like Peter just undid all his steps away from Jesus. He just undid all of them. He moved back into a close relationship with Jesus. And since all that sin was out of the way, he could have a close relationship with Jesus again. But you know what, in life, we really don't have an undo button or a delete button like you have on a computer. You know, you can hit that funny looking arrow and it can go back, like it undoes the last thing you just did. Or you can hit delete just to take away what you just did. But we really can't do that, can we? But guess what? God is forgiving. When we confess our sins to him and tell him that we're sorry, which shows that we love him, he forgives us. And when God forgives us, it's kind of like he hits the undo button or the delete button on whatever we did to mess up our friendship with him. Our relationship with God is restored. We are close to him. The sin isn't separating us from him anymore. He acts like we never did those wrong things. And that is pretty cool. That is a great picture of the fact that God is forgiving. And you know, when I was doing this lesson, it made me think of a couple of other verses that talk about how God forgets our sin, or it's like he deletes them. I'm going to read from Micah 7, verse 19. Once again, you, God, will show loving concern for us. You will completely wipe out the evil things we've done. You will throw all of our sins into the bottom of the sea. And I also thought of Hebrews 8:12. Let me read that real quick. I will forgive their evil ways. I will not remember their sins anymore. So God is forgiving. So Peter got a chance to say he loved Jesus 3 times, the same number of times that he denied knowing Jesus. It was kind of like undoing all 3 of the times that he said that he didn't know Jesus. God is forgiving. Let's see how forgiveness undoes what we do wrong. Let's see how forgiveness deletes what we do wrong. So you can do this with me at home if you'd like, but I want you to make sure you get your parents' permission, and you might need your parents' help. You're going to need 3 things. You're going to need a washable marker, a tissue or a paper towel, and a bowl of water. So if you want to pause the video right now and go grab those things, I'm going to go grab my items so that I can do it with you. All right, So I have my washable marker. It has to be one of the washable ones. And I have a paper towel. Okay, I want you to take a few seconds and think about the very worst thing you've ever done. Maybe you just think it's the worst sin that you have ever committed. So take a moment and think really hard about that. Something that you felt really bad about, really horrible about. You just knew it was so bad that you did that. And since Peter denied Jesus 3 times, I want you to write that bad thing or that sin that you just thought of. I want you to write it 3 times on your paper towel or your tissue. If you need help writing or spelling, get your parent to help you. On my paper towel, I'm going to write the sin that Peter did. And we just learned that he denied knowing Jesus. So I'm going to put denied Jesus. All right, I did it 1 time, and I'm going to write it 2 more times. So I wrote Peter's sin. He denied Jesus, he denied Jesus, he denied Jesus. He denied knowing Jesus. So remember, God is forgiving. He forgives even the worst things we've done. I'll remind you of that 3 times. Each time I say, God forgives you, I want you to dunk your paper in the water and then take it right back out. And I'm going to do it with you. Here we go. God forgives you. God forgives you. God forgives you. All right, take a look at your paper and see what happened. So what happened to your deepest, darkest sin? It's been washed away, right? It's gone. God is forgiving. No matter what we've done wrong, God will give us a fresh start, a clean start, just like he did for Peter. And just like on that paper towel or tissue paper, it was wiped clean, white as snow. Listen to this. 1 John 1, verse 9. God is faithful and fair. If we admit that we have sinned, he will forgive us our sins. He will forgive every wrong thing we have done. He will make us pure. So right there it said if we confess our sins, that God, he's faithful and he's just, and he'll forgive us of our sins, and he'll clean us from all of our sins, all of our unrighteousness. God is forgiving. Every time we confess our sins to him or tell him that we are truly sorry for the wrong things that we do, God will clean up our hearts. Just like your paper, you'll be washed clean. Did you guys know that Pastor Stephen emails these lessons to your parents every week? Well, he does. And this week, there were some pretty cool activities in the lesson. I don't have time to show them to you on the video, but I would encourage you to ask your parents to get the lesson. And there's a couple more cool activities, a lot like the one that we just did with the paper towel. One of them involves Play-Doh, and another one, you'll just need cornstarch, iodine. That might not be something you guys have at home, but maybe your parents should be willing to go buy a little bottle. I think it probably costs $3. Another marker and water. And I would encourage you to do those with your parents because they are really good, what we call object lessons, that really explain how God forgives us. And they're a lot of fun too. I hope you'll try those at home And I hope you will remember everything we talked about today. And most of all, that God is forgiving. I love you guys, and I can't wait to see you soon.